Hi, my name is Aimee Morgan, and I'm the host of the Mindfulness Academy Podcast. Thank you for joining us. On today's show, we have the Mr. Scott Sweet. Thank you for being here with us, Scott.
It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm going to hop in and let you know who Scott is. He has quite the resume, so I will do my best to summarize all that he is. Scott is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of the Insight Counseling Center in Fishers here in Indiana. He is also a licensed clinical addictions counselor, an Imago certified counselor, and lastly, an MBSR or mindfulness-based stress reduction certified teacher. So, and that is how we met, through the MBSR class.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Few years ago, time passes quickly, and that was wonderful. That actually was kind of towards the beginning of my mindfulness journey within the first few years of that, and it kind of took the practical lessons I was learning through reading books and watching videos and whatnot into a very practical endeavor. So it went from very heady to let's practice this in the flesh. So
Right. Yes. No, it's nice to, at least my experience with the class as well, was just to have a time and a place to go and practice in partnership. So it's kind of nice to have some structure.
it was, and some accountability to say, okay, I have a lot coming up today. I can feel it. I'm thinking through all of these things, but I'm going to go and sit on the mat. I have to admit, when I started the course, I had been practicing practicing based on reading books, which is very different than learning from a teacher and practicing with other people in real life. When I was in your course, I remember at the beginning, it was not easy. It was not easy at all. I don't know if that's the kind of feedback you tend to get from people.
You jump right into the deep end pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah. That makes me feel better that you feel that way, because that's how it felt with me too. The way I've tended to describe it was, I felt like I wanted to crawl out of my skin. That sitting there, not checking my phone, not running around doing something on my to-do list, not making sure something got done at work, it was so hard. And I think the lesson that kind of kept coming up for me was, isn't that interesting how the world keeps turning, even when I take a moment to sit here? I think that was the biggest thing.
The course itself invites folks to practice 45 minutes a day, and the body scans and some mindful movement and sitting practices. So I consider that a pretty big, deep dive, and just to be still. And there is some movement there as well, but just to kind of let go of some of just the normal activities and just notice it's not easy. And the Anne Lamott quote that always rings in my head is that my mind, what she says is, my mind is a dangerous neighborhood. I never want to be there alone. And so that resonated with me. And so as you first sit in silence, or just with yourself, or just with the world that keeps going, it's just kind of hard to pause and be still.
Why do you think it is hard to pause and be still? Is it because it feels like a dangerous neighborhood, or what are some of the things that you hear from people over the course of the years of training in MBSR?
Yeah, I guess two things greet me now is maybe couple pronged. One is just our own story kind of starts showing up a little bit, and it might not be totally obvious, but it can some doorways present themselves in kind of mindsets or just thoughts. And one of my famous is planning mind. So just that greets me, and part of that planning mind is just probably what the world does. I think John Kabat-Zinn says that we're a 365, 24/7 society. So it's hard to pause. We're part of a group, and old brain says, hey, if you don't do what the group does, you don't survive. So it's kind of hard just to do something that feels like a little bit different, and to be still. So between kind survival group kind of thought and process, and just your own individual story, it might be unpleasant a little bit. There's some pleasantness to it as well, and maybe, I guess as I say, it might be only for a moment where you're like, all right, I'm just kind of being. I'm not the human doing, I'm the human being. And then there's like, wow, there might be some value to that. And I'm getting a little goosebumps talking about that. So just paying attention to that as well. So, maybe some people have that moment and talking about it, that leads them to formal practice because they kind of like are thinking about it. And that certainly was my entryway, is just kind of a lot of studying. And I think that's a part of, a mindfulness practice, is just kind of framing and understanding and looking at things and educating yourself. And then, there's a lot of practices, but yeah.
I'm wondering if you could share with our guests what the mindfulness-based stress reduction course includes, kind of before we get into a little bit of your background and what brought you to mindfulness, just to kind of let folks know what you're even talking about.
Sure. It started, I think, in the late 70s at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Two gentlemen started it, and they were finding, and they had practices themselves, and they worked in a hospital. I'm not completely sure about this, the factuality of the story, but they worked in a hospital, and somehow they invited the hospital to send their toughest patients or clients to them, to this class called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And then it began where it consists of 8 meetings or 8 classes. Each class is about 2.5 hours. And then typically at the end of class 6 is an all-day silent retreat. So that's kind of the bones of it. But people are practicing just being with. Mm-hmm. And it's a practice. And folks were finding that, yes, their pain was there, and that couldn't change. However, how they held the pain, there were some options around that. And that was a doorway for folks to find some relief.
Yeah, I like the options. The choice to react instead of respond has been something that's been ringing true to me for several years. That's something that I struggle with. I mean, sometimes things will hit me a certain way, and I think, I really want to react right now because there's something coming up that is big and right at the back of my throat. But learning that there's a choice, and sometimes just a walk around the block. Sometimes it's as simple as 1, 2, 3 deep breaths, mindful breaths. Mm-hmm. And it totally changes everything for me. And that seems, if you'd have told me that several years ago, I'd say, you gotta be kidding me. Come on now.
Yeah.
Take a breath. That sounds like something you tell a child, right? But it's so true. And I think that's what kind of fuels a lot of the passion I have for mindfulness, because it can change a moment. And by changing those moments and the response, we can change our relationships. We can change our work environment. I feel like we can change the world one interaction at a time by bringing some breath, some mindfulness, some peace instead of reactivity. So thank you for doing the work that you do, because I feel like it is critical, especially in this day and age where, like you said, we have, 24/7, 365. We need a way to process. We need a way to know when to unplug, and how to, I mean, if you go with the opposite analogy, how to recharge. In the modalities of mindfulness-based stress reduction, again, it's been a few years, but I'm thinking through, we had sitting meditation. And so that one was particularly hard because there's no movement. And so you're with it. You are in the deep end and you're just there. I remember that's probably where I struggled the most. But that tends to be really kind of at the core of my current practice. That, and then also the body scan. I was doing that this morning before coming in here because I had COVID and we've had to reschedule
Yes.
this. We had intended to talk a couple weeks ago, but I ended up coming down with COVID for the first time. And I was noticing I'm still feeling kind of tight in my chest, still having a little bit of a cough. My throat was a little scratchy and dry. And so I was noticing some things. And I think the beauty of noticing, there could be the reactivity, throwing in all kinds of stories and concerns and what's going to happen during, the interview, how's my voice going to sound? And then there's also the other side of that coin that is sometimes we just hold space for noticing, and that it is interesting to notice something and not judge it or attach a story, to practice that part of it. Even if a story comes in, say, thank you, brain, for giving me that story.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to be with it and notice it, because sometimes I feel like when I approach even kind of bodily sensations like that with curiosity and non-judgment, I'm in a better mind space to care for it. I don't know if that's something that you experience, but I notice, hey, maybe I just need to grab a cough drop before I head out the door. Just take care of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, with awareness, you maybe are allowed to see some options and choices to engage in ways that allow flow. And I say flow is fun, loving, open, and willing. And so flow versus fear. Sometimes people say faith versus fear. But I like kind of flow. And I think the recovery world for a long time has said, if you can claim it, you can tame it. And so mindfulness is a little bit a part of claiming. And so what's going on, with my body and my heart and my mind. And if we can kind of just, ascertain a little bit of that, then sometimes it can give us some options or choices to have a breath mint, or take a breath, or who knows what it might be, just to, as Dan Harris says, maybe make it 10% better.
Exactly. Love his podcast. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's just so great. I'm wondering, a couple of the other modalities that we practiced in class was a walking meditation, which in a tight space, we might have walked across the room, or one of my favorites is to walk across a yoga mat. I remember doing that in one of the silent retreats that you led, which was also very difficult. Lots of interesting things came up that day in my mind. There's a whole production, actually, a center stage and a lot going on. But I loved that practice because it showed me that I don't need loads of space and even necessarily loads of time, just taking a few steps across a mat. And there's a mindfulness to how long is the mat, and then what am I going to do at the other end, and creating kind of a rhythm that it really worked for me. So I don't know if that might work for others, but that really worked for me.
It doesn't have to be that complicated. I mean, I want to, if it's more complicated, then there may be some more value, or if it costs more or something. So there's some inherent value, and that's maybe some patterns of mine. And just checking in on the body or the heart, noticing the movement, maybe just, walking meditation across the mat, or just sitting. These all, sound fairly simple, but, simple ain't simple. There's a lot of richness. There's a lot that goes on, and a lot of data, a lot of information, and it's sometimes overwhelming. And so it's just kind of a practice on how to navigate something that relatively seems simple, yet there's a lot present, or a lot that comes up, or that's available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love the comment about, it can be as expensive or as cheap as you want it to be. I would say most folks have a place on the floor even, or a bed that they could lie down in and scan their bodies, which is one of the modalities that we use. Lots of stories come up around that as well. Old injuries. Hey, that doesn't hurt anymore. All kinds of things come up. Or just even having a chair. I mean, that's the other thing that occurs to me so much, because you can spend an infinite amount of money practicing mindfulness if you wanted to, or you could use a chair in your bed. It doesn't have to have, you don't have to have special equipment, really.
No, it's it could be pretty simple. And as we practice being still, I think we do a lot of time traveling, and so we can be in touch with the old injuries, and certainly forecast how this injury will affect the future, and somewhere around there, I think it could be useful to spend some time around noticing that, or even processing that, and even grieving sometimes. I don't think that as some of the visitors arrive on our mat or cushion, that we totally just, we allow them in and weep or cry or laugh. And I've done both. I've laughed myself silly. I can't believe that. And also have definitely grieved and wept, just because your life shows up on the mat, past and some ideas of what might the future be. And then, as I think Joseph Goldstein says, at some point, whatever thought train I'm on, I'm like, is this useful? And sometimes I do find that, this actually is useful, because I am processing some old stuff. And I think that's the useful part for me. A lot of the future stuff, I get entertained by that, but when I ask, is this useful, for the time that I set aside, I'm like, I'm gonna practice letting this go and return back to whatever help anchors me for the particular moment in practice.
That's useful to hear. One of the other modalities I remember is really tapping into the senses, getting really, and that's kind of a foundational bit, because as you kind of take that to the mat, or to the cushion, or wherever it might be, or just to your office.
Yeah.
And so tasting and smelling and seeing and hearing, just getting into the granular nature that is being in a particular moment. I think we used a raisin. There's so much that can happen with a raisin. You could not believe what can happen with a raisin.
Back to simple, just a single raisin.
Yeah.
And the expression, the GPS to the present are our senses. So if I can pay attention to that information data source, and that kind of brings me here.
Absolutely. One of the things I love the most, I think this was one of the homework assignments that you had given to us, was just to kind of be really present. For instance, when you're in the shower, or you're brushing your teeth, and the one, just even washing my hair. So one of the practices that I like to have is when I get my shampoo. Again, I already have the shampoo. This is not an extra investment. But as I get it out and I put it in my hand, I might notice how it feels, the color, and I try to smell it. That may seem odd, but I try to smell it, just to be present for one moment. And I try to capture those moments where I'm there. I'm there for it. Mm-hmm. And so I've utilized a lot of the practices, if not really all of them, in my daily or weekly practices. It's been really a gift. So thank you for giving of your time and helping me learn those things.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I mean, it's out there in the world, and sometimes I've appreciated it. I've done it for all my personal reasons, and then decided to just share it with others, because that's a whole new teaching for me too. And time, place, and partner. And who would have thought, my shampoo bottle is going to be a partner here? But there's the time and place, and there can be some consistency where we're like, okay, I'm gonna wash my hair, and then that can be a consistent practice. And I think that matters. So it doesn't have to be all woo-woo and incense or anything like that. It's just washing the hair.
So simple. It's just so simple.
And then noticing when you're not washing the hair. I mean, you are washing the hair, but you're completely out of the shower, and you're in the office, and not literally, but that's where the mind is. Yeah.
It's interesting, because I think what resonates with me is that if I learn to be present for even the smell of my shampoo, that is a practice, a foundational block that allows me to be present, for instance, in this moment. To notice you're wearing a blue shirt.
Yeah.
You're nodding your head.
Absolutely.
I can be present, and I believe that there are a lot of nutrients, is what I like to call it, in a given moment. And the more I'm in the past or trying to think about something in the future, I'm not here, and I'm not getting the nutrients. And so I'm starving myself of that. And so That's what I try to pull back to. That's kind of the framework of a part of my mindfulness. Yeah.
Yeah, Brene Brown talks about just seeing the extraordinary and the ordinary. And so I think my experience is that there's so much that assaults my senses to get my attention. And and sometimes I want it. I want that. I want to go to a movie to be assaulted in some ways, because I would perceive value then if I paid $12 for a ticket. And just sitting and being with the raisin or with someone and talking. There's a book out there, and I just like the title. I think I haven't read the book, but it probably has some value. It's called The Power of Moments, and it's like why certain moments have extraordinary impact on our lives. And I believe that to be true. We do have moments, and in a pleasant sense and an unpleasant sense, and they do have extraordinary impact. And some of that is outside our control. And I wonder if we can initiate some extraordinary moments too, and what that will look like. And it sounds like you got to go out and just buy a bunch of stuff or fly a bunch of places or have a bunch of adrenaline. And maybe that's, I like that too. And I can sit down and just be in my backyard. And as I bring the senses around and really pay attention, and I think that can be extraordinary too. So it doesn't have to be epic.
That's a great reminder. You talked a few moments ago about time traveling, so I want to do that a little bit in our conversation. Let's go back.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about where you're from. Tell me a little bit about your history, your education, where life has taken you. I know you've taken a year-long trip, just traveling. You have some interesting bits in your life resume, not just on LinkedIn, but in your life resume.
So, white, male, American, I'm 54 years old, right? So to try and travel a little bit back, where it all started, I suppose, was, Indianapolis, born here, grew up on the north side, affluent community, definitely come from a place of privilege, and it was lots of pleasant moments. Definitely unpleasant moments there too. I guess I think in terms of, and sometimes how to describe that, big T's or little T's. Big T's are big traumas, and little T's are little traumas. And so fortunately, I was just kind of more on the little T side of things. And those are hard because you don't know sometimes they're happening sometimes too. I mean, there is a moment, you can feel it, but it's not recorded quite maybe as some others are. So the opportunity for recovery can be difficult at times. Maybe we'll get into that later. So, went to IU, Indiana University, and studied history and criminal justice. It was interesting looking back on that. I really wanted to be a business major. And it just didn't work out. And my sense of failure around that, or lack of discipline, or, felt like I was lazy or unfocused, or I wasn't going to be successful forecasting into the future.
A lot of stories there, Scott.
Lots of stories. Why can't I, do this? I'm not afraid of hard work. Looking back, my body and my heart were telling me in big ways that you are not a business person. But I didn't pay attention to that because my mind said that I needed to do that, or my thoughts. And I guess, they're not, some of this data or these stories or the patterns in the environment we live in is not exactly true. So I had to pivot because I didn't have a choice. I wasn't going to be admitted into the business school. And I did study history and criminal justice, and I just enjoyed that. Figured I needed a piece of paper to kind of survive in this culture, got it. And then I couldn't get a job. So that was another kind of like setback, which ended up being a setup. I had a friend that spent some time, a semester in Singapore, and I could barely pronounce it, or let alone know where it was. So I decided to be a travel writer after school, and had the business plan. I mean, this is what,
22-year-olds do.
A son of an entrepreneur does. And that fell away too. I thought I'd be gone for a couple months, and it ended up being longer. I ended up traveling a lot of times in Asia, And that's where I ran into the mindfulness practice. So I was just talking to somebody in Australia, and he was like, hey, you got to go to this class in Thailand. It's for Westerners. It's a 10-day meditation retreat. I think you'd find some value in that. And I'm like, all right. And he's like, told me where the town was. And so this was 1990, 1991. So I just showed up in the town. I asked where this monastery was. And the good news was, and I didn't know this, I was 4 days early to this 10-day meditation retreat. So, because they just did it once a month. And so that was the whole trip, and particularly that retreat was probably a paradigm shift for me.
All right.
Yeah. And so,
tell me about those 10 days, Scott.
Yeah,
what happened?
Yeah. So I think, and I'll use this story that I'm using more a lot lately. So I read this guy's book and speech. This is Water by David Foster Wallace. And so he's got this story because there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, and the old one looks at them and says, morning, boys, how's the water? And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, what the heck is water? So, I guess the story of my life are kind of some patterns where, you just grow up and you just don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
And so, the Pacers were super important in my life, grades, sports, achievement, make friends, have influence. I think it's, a little bit about the soup that we live in here. There's, probably the striving lane. And so, I grew up Methodist, so a lot of great foundations, and I want to keep much of it. But some of it, I think, needed to be changed or altered. And so, so traveling, I saw a lot of different ways to live and to be. And
That's
there
the beauty of travel.
wasn't one way. And I suppose the idea or the philosophy and some of the practices around mindfulness was another a graduate degree for me in life. And
Sure.
so as much as that was a setback to not, be able to sell, I went through the business school. I thought I had a pretty good resume. And I thought I could sell the toothpaste better than anybody. But they just said no. And they being maybe a higher power. And so down in the dumps, I was calling people, trying to get sell window appointments, to window install appointments for a number of months to kind of get myself ready to take off on this trip. But anyway, it was a great education.
So let's get back to those 10 days.
Okay.
If this is a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
paint me a picture.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things happened. The prajnas brought...
How many people? Can you give me a sense for the setting? So you're in a monastery.
Yeah. It was in the town of Suratani. Ajahn Buddhadasa was the head monk, just a wise old guy. And so and then these retreats that wherever you are, they're kind of set up the same way where, you wake up early and you practice and you eat a little bit and you do some chores and you practice and you walk and you practice and then you eat a little bit and walk, practice. In the end of the evening, there's usually a discussion or a talk, and it was basically, a frame, and I hadn't heard these frames before on our patterns and belief systems, sometimes referred to as just, a Dharma talk, and so that was useful. So between the practice, so that was a lot of body, heart, and certainly mental practices that we've experienced together, and then also the frame of things. That was a combination that was really helpful.
Excellent. And were there 10 people there with you? Give me a sense for...
Yeah, I think there might have been probably 50 people or
wow.
maybe more. So it was a large facility. I don't even know if they charged me. I think they looked for donations. And so it wasn't, that's kind of the culture, or that was just, I guess in, the United States, even you're like, hey, we're going to charge for this and it's going to be this and that. That wasn't the case there. So I think 50 people showed up, and you're given a single room. It was just a concrete slab. And so it was really simple. After noon, we did like the monks did. We didn't have anything to eat, and we had a little tea or maybe a little bit of an orange or an apple in the evening. So, yeah, that was the beginning.
So you really were in the deep end.
Absolutely.
You went from kind of 0 to 100.
Yeah, I did. I think the Methodist upbringing offered a lot of sing-song. That was great. I love we did some chanting. I love singing. I think that there's a vibrational components of stuff. That resonated in my body. I could really whoa, something's going on here with that. And it was intellect, and there was a lot of great framing with that as well. I think I was just missing some of the body practices and being attuned to that. And so that was helpful. And to do with others, again, it was a time, place, and a partner. And my mother had experienced some setbacks, some physical health issues, and she started really just discovering meditation on her own. We're in Indiana. It's I don't know, it's just, so out of her own, probably just survival of some discomfort, she started practicing meditation, and it would probably be, Christian meditation, some mantras around some scripture and that type of thing, or breath practices. But she kind of talked about that. So I think I was kind of kind of knew a little bit or something, or heard something. So, whatever causes and conditions allowed this guy to tell me in Australia, go to this place, and I showed up and it worked out. That was a blessing.
That's amazing. What a story. So what happened after that, those 10 days?
Oh, I just bummed around and, just looked more. I think awareness is sometimes not easy. So I had lost a really good friend, a best friend, right before I left on this trip. So I was doing some grieving, and then on top of just this kind of felt like a paradigm shift, it was my desert. And it was difficult to just what can I anchor down here on, and what's happening, or how do I want to go? So I just kept on traveling, and it was extended. I had more time than money, and Nepal, I could stay for 5 cents a night, these places. So hey, I was still kind of still wanting to move on and kind of still some stuff, see some stuff. And then I got back, and then I hit Washington, D.C., and the pace was different, and that was really hard too. So I kind of really slowed down and did a lot of reading and processing a lot of stuff. But it was enough time to kind of give me an introduction and an idea of okay, as the Mandalorian says, this is the way, So I was like, this might be my way.
Absolutely. And you came to D.C. to work at C-SPAN.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a 180 from practicing mindfulness.
C-SPAN is
foreign country.
You're right. I hadn't thought of this before, but C-SPAN
just
is probably.
I'm thinking just speed.
You're
going
absolutely,
from silence to.
But
it is the news.
C-SPAN is the speed of real life. They
true.
show things from gavel to gavel, from beginning to end, and so. Boy, that was probably interesting enough, a place to land. I was the history criminal justice major. I didn't want to kind of jump on the sides of things. So C-SPAN, plus I had a good friend that worked there and helped me out to get my first job. And so, but it all makes sense. And there was some nice experiences there for sure. And it was fun just to be there and just observe. And C-SPAN was a good pace for me.
Good.
And you're right, it was still hard. And I'll exaggerate this pattern, but a little bit. It's like people just say, hey, how are you doing? Or how was your weekend? And I was so accustomed to really answering that question that I didn't recognize, oh, no, that's a ritual. I mean, we're going to do that, but we're not going to really go there and talk about that. So it's one of those. It was a thumbs up or medium with a thumbs down. That's about all we had time for.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the change of
Yeah.
pace a little bit there.
Yep.
So your journey to mindfulness began abroad in
Yeah.
this, officially on this 10-day retreat. Did you keep up with it when you're back in DC, or take me along. So you were here in, where did you say it was? What was the name of the town?
Oh, in Thailand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a fancy name,
yeah,
or it was a very difficult name.
Surat Thani. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. So you're there, and you come back. You go to DC. Paint a picture for me. What happens between then and say when I met you? A few years back.
Right. So the quick, factual journey. Yeah, DC for about 5 years, Seattle for about 5 years, then back to Indianapolis. I met my wife in Washington, D.C. She's also from Indiana. We worked for C-SPAN together. The founder introduced us, and he was the matchmaker, kind of unbeknownst to us. And it's worked out. And then my first daughter was born in Seattle, second in Indianapolis. So that's the quick, and spent some time in Indianapolis, doing a number of things until I got into the kind of just this greater mindful practice of mental health counseling. But back to, I think the question is like, well, what do the mindfulness practices look like?
Yeah, how did it transform between Thailand and?
Yeah, I don't know if it was super formal, right after that, and I can't remember. I do remember going to like seminars and classes. So I was working for C-SPAN, just dubbing tapes and taking viewer calls. So that part of my life wasn't being kind of like where I think in my industry now, like social work and kind of like the trainings you go to, it's kind of all kind of like, you're kind of doing mindful stuff, awareness practices. Where different industry, the media, it might have been there. I didn't see it so much, but so I would augment or support with I remember just taking classes, and the city had a lot to offer, and so a lot of just again framing, intellectual framing, and some practices. There's a strong community that I get emails still today from them. That practices in DC, and then Seattle's kind of the same. Primarily, though, my practices would look like, your equivalent of shampoos. I think, religious weekly practices, formal meditation. I began doing some counseling, mental health counseling out in Seattle. And so I think that's a big mindful practice. And just, body work, the Rolfing. I think there's a lot of doorways into kind of just becoming more aware. What is mindfulness? And I think it's just kind of ultimately loving awareness. And okay, well, how do you love, or how do you be aware? There might be some steps around that, but whatever it might look like to allow some more loving awareness.
And is that kind of your definition of mindfulness then? Loving awareness?
Yeah, I think it's a characteristic. It can, and there can be some actions around that looks like non-judgmental, moment-to-moment practice to attend. So meditation, mindfulness. I think we practice kind of just some being, which might look like meditation, to notice, I guess, some of the four foundations of mindfulness. And the four foundations of mindfulness are thoughts, body sensations, feelings, and I'll summarize the fourth as just as patterns and beliefs. And so if I can be aware of those things, then that can really bring me some different options or choices. And so I can engage and have some flow. So it sounds, again, like that template sounds pretty easy, but it's just been a lifelong practice for me. Some of the biggest teachers are, it was Ajahn, Buddhadasa, certainly, I guess, like, okay, yeah, that guy was helpful. But really, yeah, my wife, my kids, my dog, I mean, they're my biggest teachers, because that which kind of activates my body can really inform me of maybe some stuckness or a lack of flow in my body. So, white male American kind of privileged place, I can really kind of get pretty righteous, or I can, that's a kind of almost a set point for me in a little ways. And I find that righteousness is really comes out of fear and some stuckness. So I'd like to think I've really kind of come from that I type A to, I don't know what else the others are, but definitely more flow. So yeah, it's looked a lot of different ways through the years, and continue to try to help frame it, continue to practice, and it feels pleasant to talk to others about it.
It does.
Yeah.
I love doing that. And you loved it so much that you decided to become certified to train folks in mindfulness. And when did that come about?
Yeah.
Remind me.
I think that was I'm not even sure. I can't remember. Maybe before I really started, kind of like or about the same time I decided to go into kind of the mental health field. I was struggling a bit. I was back in Indianapolis working for the YMCA. And a place where they help support the mind, body, spirit. So, and I felt like, okay, my learning curve had kind of flatlined a little bit. I went to a career counselor, and he took me through all these tests. He goes like, "You're a lot like social workers." And I was like, oh my gosh, I was still clinging and attached to this idea that if I made a buck, that I'd have some value. Andy Grammer has got a song coming out. It's called "Love is the New Money." And I appreciate that. That's not where I've come from. I thought if I'd have money, I'd get the love. And so when I heard, like, you're going to be a social worker, and okay, I've got 2 kids. I'm going back to graduate school. My first job, I'm making $17 an hour. So it was rough. It was hard. And, but it made sense to me. It made sense to the body, and there was flow present. And so it was just kind of like faith that if I keep on doing this, I'll figure out how to pay the bills somehow and take care of the family. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy options. And I've seen how options have been helpful to one's just physical health too. So decided to kind of get into this mindfulness thing, which is also the mental health field. And, that's but what we do. I sit with people, and I was like, tell me your story. And it's just that. It is a story, and how we interpret the story. And as you're telling the story, you're going to probably feel certain things and feel it in your body. And the industry, I think, is going more and more is like, let's talk about the story, the content, one foundation of mindfulness, but let's also bring in the heart and the body and a larger view of where you've come from. And this combination seems to be some ingredients to allow for some transformation. And so, we can all tell the story, and most of the time that's what happens when I'm with folks. And I don't want to be super interruptive about, like, okay, where you're feeling your body and that type of thing. But as we were talking a little bit earlier, the book title, "The Body Keeps the Score," we're learning that that we need to tap into some of these resources to allow transformation to happen, because it's just not all above the ears thinking that allows for healing. It's much of it's really below the ears, and if we can bring those two things together. So, I don't know if I was super aware of all of this kind of blending itself together, and I think I was just kind of blindly just led to this, maybe some intuition or following my heart to a degree, like, okay, we're going to do the training out of UMass and all that meant. And
for MBSR.
For MBSR, to be kind of considered a certified teacher, lots of hoops, and that makes sense. But it was also informing. And then, a lot of training around the social work side too. So, maybe none of the jobs are that far from just trying to support oneself and others. But this is where I've landed.
Do you feel that in your social work and your counseling training that you're taught mindfulness and taught mindfulness in a way as a way to teach others about mindfulness? Do you feel like that's kind of part of that curriculum for you, or is it maybe how you interpreted it? I'm kind of curious about that as a field.
I think with social work and the education, it was very macro, and just and this is important. Like, where have we come, where are we going? There is a kind of an idea that we're all connected, and how. And so it was very macro focus. I decided to do a mental health concentration within the kind of the formal education, and it was probably all there. Maybe some of this, like understanding feelings and thoughts, I didn't get it at that time. I wasn't totally present with the combination of what they were saying and maybe what the mindfulness practice was. I didn't totally bring those together, and that's a more or a latter occurrence. I was like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, all these blend together. I still think that we can do a better job around social emotional learning. Yeah. I feel like I've gone through 19 years of formal education, and I don't think anybody invited me to pause and check in with what are you feeling, or what's going on with the body. That just hasn't happened, and or didn't happen, or if it did, I just was in my own rotation of striving or thinking, and just didn't invite it. So it perhaps was there, but I didn't see it. Yeah. And so I think the world is changing. I think we're understanding that tapping in. I mean, we got all the information in our back pockets now that we need. So that's a whole nother problem, is that all this information is causing a lot of emotional distress. And so now we're like, okay, what do we do with this emotional part of our lives?
Absolutely. I feel like a common theme that I'm hearing in our conversation is around tapping into the senses of the body. You've brought that up several times, and that is really useful. I'm wondering if you talked about even back many years ago where you noticed in your body was telling you, you're not a business major. There's something else for you. And you talked about, again, kind of tapping into that when you were told, hey, you really might be a great social worker, that you've become attuned to your body. Can you give us some examples of what it looks like to scan the body, and what sensations might inform?
Sure. Back a little bit wider view, back to the fish story even. I think that there's just a lot of times that I don't know the water I'm swimming in. So the water I swam in was, drinkable water, and some parts were not so healthy for me, and my body was telling me all this, but I just didn't pay attention to it because I just didn't know. So, and I think that's just kind of our lives. We're creatures of habit and patterns, and that can be really useful because we can dedicate energies to other things, but we do need to know where we've come from to understand the water we did swim in, to make some choices of what water we want to be in. So one thing that kind of indicates or informs me that I might be entering in some old patterns of fix, manage, and control water is my body. So again, back to my teachers, my kids, and my wife. I mean, there's nothing more activating than fear. And why do I have this fear? And there's such innocence with with children, and I've installed a lot of fear in them, and that's my stuff. And it's just, this is what we do. We just kind of pass this stuff down. And so what lately I've tried is, as my body lights up, it's probably the first thing that tells me that there's something going on here. You're doing some stinking thinking, or you're in some stinky water that might not you're swimming in, that you can have some choice. You don't have to do that. Your kids are going to be fine. The sum of their parts are good and beautiful. I just focus on the little parts that maybe make me nervous, or I focus on that on myself too, that maybe make me nervous, and it creates all these stories and all that stuff. But all this stuff is usually happening without my knowing, but my body usually says, "Oh," and I feel that, and then I can maybe catch the story. I can wonder a little bit, what are the feelings, anxiousness, fear, and so I kind of call it the 4-point check-in. So it's like, okay, my body's usually informing me, like, where am I feeling the activation? Okay, and then I take a breath and I kind of soften the body. It kind of gives me an idea, like, all right, what's the mindset here? What am I worried about? What's the prevailing thought here? And maybe that, is a quick summary. What's the feeling? And then I think, and then sometimes I like to go 0 to 10-point scale, like how activated am I? And so that really gets me above the ears, kind of part of the body, the new brain above the ears. And then I can probably be, combine the old brain, new brain, kind of wise mind about my next choices on how I want to behave or what this looks like. So the 4-point check-in is just something real simple. And it can be real formal, and I like to practice it on a formal basis, and I invite people to do that. It's like, okay, we got to practice this, because when it's game on, you have to have some practice. And so I won't look like a fool. My reactivity, a lot of times with my wife is like, okay, I can do game on. If you want to play, I'll play. But selfishly, it doesn't do any good for either one of us, And so I say, all right, catch yourself to want to defend the ego or the self, or the fears or my hurts. And as I've worked on that through, just my own therapy and my own practices, there has been, for me, significant shifts where I've like, okay, I can it's still there. It's not like it's not going to be there. It's just how long or how deep and who else is affected is more optional. And so I'm like, all right, I check in and I'm like, hey, just be with my wife, just be with my kids, just be with them. They'll figure this out. That my presence is the biggest gift. We've heard this all the time. I still have to convince myself of this on a daily basis. And I think it's not as hard for me to do it. And it still presents itself as an invitation. It's like, well, here's a decision tree for you. So
I'm wondering, I'm willing to share too.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share, you talked about your body, what did you say, lighting up? What's a way that you notice maybe there's fear or there's anger or another kind of big natural emotion that might be coming up? What happens in your body? Just to give folks some examples of things that might happen.
Yeah, on the extreme case, and I don't even know why I smile when I think about this. This is not, but I think it's just the struggles of everyday life. And so a struggle for me were younger kids, and my wife was wonderful, and so thank goodness she was around, because I would bite the inside of my mouth because I wanted to fix, manage, or control kids, children. I mean, they're innocent. They're just doing 3 to 5-year-old things. And that was very difficult for me, where I would clench my fist. And so fortunately, maybe I'm smiling because I'm like, oh, I just remembered I'm not dealing with that so much anymore.
Because we're 20 and 22
well,
now.
Yeah,
so
it's like, oh. Yeah. I don't think the issues are actually, bigger deal. And so it's just so interesting, why was I so worked up at that time? And I think it's just a part of my evolution. You're in your 20s or 30s and you're just trying to figure things out and you want things to be right. I swam in the water, the right water. There's a right way, and you got to be right. And it was exhausting. So today, the way it looks like is the car is a real good teacher for me. It could be, it's just, I'm doing it right now, thinking about it. The back of my legs start to tense up. My buttocks tense up. there's two spots that I hold my activation, and it's not attractive to say, but it's true. Muscles in my face and my anus. So every single time I check in right that on with those two areas, and I can do it right now, things soften. So my body can get real activated, and as I pay attention to those areas, that just tells me something's going on, and that's my first signal. It's my most signal, and the story that I think I'm in recovery from is that I've never paid attention to my body. I was never taught to do that in sports, and I think it's just kind of the Western male. You just don't do that. I haven't menstruated. I haven't had kids. I think I just don't. I wasn't ever invited, or the social emotional education of just paying attention to the body. That was not seen ever as a resource. Yeah, it just might makes right. And I think if I do get activated and I do get big, there is actually value in that, and then use that. Mm-hmm. And I learned that in football. I would get hyped, and then I wasn't big, but on the football team, I was voted number 1 on the killer squad, because we had a killer squad, and it was called Killer Squad. And I wanted to be number 1, and I was. I mean, it means you got to choose your jersey number. So,
what number were you?
22. So that was a moment of great pride and a great success and accomplishment. But if we look at the water, dirty, very dirty, in my opinion now. That was not some parts, some of the attributes I will take, but the premise and how to do that and how to get there wasn't supportive for mental health.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. Those are very deep and personal things, and things that we carry on with us.
Absolutely.
We still process through those things.
And it's fun to, I think I appreciate the opportunity is, the opportunities you say thank you. And it's really an opportunity for me too. I can't tell you the last time I thought about this killer squad.
And still it's there in
it's
the
still,
fiber
it's still
of
there.
your being.
Yeah. It's like, why is it, it's like,
it comes up.
Yeah, it comes up.
Life has a way of doing that. For me, thank you for sharing how you experience, the physicality of big emotions. I think for me, I find 3 main ways.
Okay.
I notice the facial tension, like you had mentioned. I notice that sometimes my throat will tighten up, and there's all kinds of, rationale for that, and lots of psychology behind, the throat literally kind of locking up on me. And then that can be through nervousness or conflict, or just feeling like I can't say what I need to say, that I'm fighting against that. And then the other one is I'll find sometimes when I'm in difficult situations, I'm holding my breath. And there are times where I think, oh my goodness, when was the last time I took a breath? I've been holding my breath through this difficult conversation, and I need to breathe, because how much, I'm sure I'm just ratcheting my brain into reptilian mode. And it's incredible how we can do that. And so I do try to touch base with my body. And I've spoken with several other folks who have come from various upbringings. I come from a very conservative background, and the body is something that, in a lot of ways, I've had the discussion several times, how the body in a lot of ways is something that it almost seems like silently we're told to ignore the body, deny it in a lot of ways. And so we can choose, in if we believe that story, to detach and not have the practice of touching base with what's going on, because we try to ignore it, and we're kind of more of a being, a soul, instead of a physicality. But this is my home, and I think the older I get, the more I think, yes, I am a brain, I am a spirit, I am a heart, but I'm also a body, and it deserves, and honestly, in a lot of ways, Scott, it demands to be heard. And so sometimes when I tell my brain or my heart, my spirit, no, I'm not going to listen to you, the body, like we said, it keeps score, and it tends to be the one that's kind of, the sage human that comes to me and says, Aimee, it's not for you. It's not for you. Or you need to listen to what's going on in the situation. You're denying a piece of this that is not in line with who you are. Mm-hmm. And you need to honor that. And I'm going to make you honor that. It will stop the roll, Scott.
It really will, and in kind of the short-term or long-term way, it will inform us that something's unbalanced. And so, like the mind, Anne Lamott quote, our mind's like in a dangerous neighborhood. I think our bodies have been through some dangerous neighborhoods too. And so I think there's a coping mechanism to disassociate from it, because it holds unpleasantness. And so it could be injuries, it can be trauma, it could be a lot of things that we don't want to be attuned to it, because it is a vessel that holds stories that are difficult.
Yeah. Even aging, to look in the mirror some mornings and to be with it. It's kind of like sniffing the shampoo, looking in the mirror, looking in our eyes, at our face. How has it changed in the last week, month, year?
Yeah.
And being with it I think one of the things that I've been working on is trying to be deeply appreciative of this vessel of flesh that is taking me through an incredible journey, what I would consider a really incredible journey.
Yeah.
And instead of beating it up and all the, the negative thought patterns that can happen when we look in the mirror, when we think about ourselves, when we have an ache or pain or sickness, being grateful. It's lasted, and it's taken me to some incredible places and allowed me to engage with other humans around the world. I've also done some incredible travel, and I'm deeply grateful for that. And so I heard you say just a moment ago, you talked about dissociating, and I would like to take a moment and talk about that through the lens of maybe difficult emotions, pain. I definitely want to hit on that, and also addictions, because I think that is a word that comes up quite a bit, that we're dissociating when we choose addictions. And I know that you talk about addiction is a multi-lane highway. It can look completely different. I mean, there are obvious ones that society, shines a bright light on. You've got, alcohol and drugs, all kinds of, very physical manifestations of dissociating. But there are also other ways. And so I do want to, technology is one we've even talked about. There are ways where technology can become an addiction as well. I have noticed in dissociation, I think at the beginning of my practice, that I was kind of addicted to being busy. I don't know if that's an official term for that lane of the highway, but I was always on the run.
The busy lane.
The busy lane. Scott, I noticed.
Isn't there HOV on this lane?
Oh, I'm sure. I have a busload of people. I even noticed last night. It's not something that just happens overnight and like, I'm the perfect meditator and I can be mindful in all these moments. I noticed last night that, as I got into bed, I thought, I'm grabbing for my Kindle because there's a book I'm wanting to read and I just want to zone out. And there is nothing inherently wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But there's this moment that I think often, isn't it interesting how I always want to be stimulated in one way or another? That's almost its own addiction, which can come in the form of technology and in a lot of different ways. And so I would be just very open and honest. That is one that is big for me. And that has to do with task lists. Mm-hmm. It has to do with just feeling like if I don't do this, then someone's going to be on my case here in 20 minutes or whatever it might be, or someone will think worse of me. All kinds of stories, loads of stories in that lane. Mm-hmm. And, I noticed I was going through a lot of pain prior to starting MBSR with you, and during massive amounts of emotional pain. I was processing through a lot of things from years past that finally just, I was exhausted from running. And so it's a running or a dissociating, those can kind of come maybe a couple different flavors of kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I noticed when I sat with the pain, which is why I wanted to crawl out of my skin, that a lot of body sensations came up. And even like a feeling that my heart was cracking in two. Physically, it felt almost impossible to bear at times. Mm-hmm. It really did. And I highly recommend working with a counselor when you're going through things like that, because sometimes it can be too much, and you have to learn how long should I be sitting with this, and how long do I need to just take a breather and think on other things, because it can be too much at once. Like drinking a gallon of water or a gallon of milk at once. Sometimes that's too much. A lot of times too much. But I noticed a lot of physical sensations. And I think what has been most useful to me in my practice, one of the top things has been noticing the body. And I'm so grateful we've talked about that a lot today, because it can inform a lot that's going on that maybe we're not even aware of. But I noticed that when I had pain or big emotions, fear, massive amounts of fear, that when I noticed what was going on with my body, instead of concentrating on all the thoughts, when I noticed what was going on with my body, it wasn't as scary, because I thought, okay, what's going on with me? Well, my reaction is what? Yes, I see all these thoughts floating by. I notice that. But my body, my throat's tight. And I notice I'm clenching my jaw. And I notice my shoulders might be up around my shoulder, or my shoulders might be up around my ears, which is another thing that can happen to me. Maybe I'm still holding my breath, or I'm taking extremely shallow breaths. It can be a number of things, but when I notice, or my stomach has been upset for a couple of days and I'm noticing it's still upset, my body has a lot of ways of telling me things are off, but it feels less scary. It feels like, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, holding our pain like a baby, like a crying baby. And I think of that so often because in those moments of sitting with meditation and noticing the physical sensations, I feel like I'm holding myself like a child and saying, oh, that's so hard. And isn't that interesting what all your body is doing to tell you it hurts or that you're scared? And instead of judging it or running away from it or catastrophizing, just noticing. And when I am present for myself and I care for myself, like holding myself like a child, I don't need that as much from other people, because I've taken care of myself. And not saying, oh, don't ever talk to other people or don't lean on other people. That's not at all what I'm saying, at all. But I come to those conversations a lot of times in a more steady place, because I've cared for me enough, and I'm not looking for other people to just totally fill in that space. Yeah. So that's been huge for me, because I realized that pain is one of life's greatest teachers. And if I feel it, Scott, it demands to be felt. It's kind of like we're talking, the body keeps score again. It demands to be felt. And you can run from it, or you can disassociate, a number of different things. It will be felt. And it may be 10 minutes down the road. It may be 10 years down the road. But it will be felt. So if we can learn the ways to feel it in a healthy way,
right,
in a way that works for us, I think that is a pathway to freedom.
Right. And freedom maybe is just the ability to choose.
Yeah.
And I don't know how free I am sometimes. I think I've placed myself in a lot of patterned boxes or thinking boxes, and I'll think or believe a certain mindset and not know that I'm actually in that place, because that's the water I've been swimming in. And I'm picking up that, at some point the body's going to inform you, and even in just the day-to-day stuff, I think that, wherever water you're swimming in, is as soon as you start paying attention to the body and the heart, or, scale it or something, you're already stopped off that thought train. So this is a way to get off the train. And so maybe that activation, and the activation is our own story. We create our own suffering. And that's kind of the second arrow stuff. We create our own suffering. So if we can stop and get off that second arrow train about all these stories and just pay attention, if you only for a moment, then I believe that can be useful. And it's been useful for me. And then that can lead to a lot of decision trees, which might be hard. It's like, well, I might need to do something different, or I might need to hug myself or pause, or whatever that might look like. But I think that in general, because we have so many options available to us, technology, food, exercise, or there's a lot of different lanes on the addiction highway, which means we're basically exiting our lives because we don't like what we see, and primarily that's shame, and that's a biological instinct too. It's like, I don't want to be uncomfortable. We're programmed to just be comfortable as best you can. Old brain wants to do that. Don't do that. So I think the new brain says, hey, actually you might need to address some of these things. There might be a variety of different ways to do that. And sometimes, I think I heard you say, it can be a single breath. So, in the midst of, I remember this moment, I'm in a therapy session and I take a big in and out. And my therapist said, that was just a great act of self-love. And I got what she said, which was the breath. So, and I think it can be that simple.
I'm wondering, before we kind of get into the practice section, if you could talk to me a little bit about the impact of mindfulness on the folks that you counsel. Maybe it would be in general, maybe it would be even a single anonymous story. How mindfulness is helping in that particular field.
Yeah, awareness practice, mindfulness, loving self and loving. I suppose that is the intention. What greets me is just, and maybe at risk of overdoing it, is my own story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I've said a lot of it. I appreciate the love of self more and more, and acceptance of others more and more. And so, I don't know if we can put this in the show notes. YouTube, This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. It's a video of a song that's sung in that movie, a musical. And it's the lead character, I think, practicing this song. And so they offer some background. But I appreciate the premise. This is me. And welcome and entertain all of me. And let's be loving. And so just heard a sermon about that too. And then he played that video at the end of the sermon. So I'd seen the video, and each time I see the video, I weep a bit. And I'm still curious about what that's about. That's another conversation. And it's just the acceptance of me, perhaps. It's like, I'm more and more accepting of me. And so if I can partner with anybody to help allow that to happen, then I'm game for that. It's a funny thing. We talked about that career coach. He said, you're a lot like social workers, but he says, you're also testing that you really don't care about anybody. This is what he said to me. He said, if I were dying on the side of the road, the statistics show, or these tests show that you would walk by me. You have very little empathy. So he goes, I don't know. This is the data. This is what the data says. You do with it what you want. It's kind of like a fortune teller, And so I think that I've come a long way to be empathetic from where I've come from, because I was on the killer squad. And so
That's part of your work.
yeah. So, I think part of, thanks for the invitation, telling the story is if, anybody can get just, one idea how they can be just practice or a practice formal or a practice in thinking or partnership or have a little bit more awareness, great. I feel like that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I would love for you to lead us in a practice, and then I will lead us in a practice.
Okay.
And I think we can wrap up from there. So what's one practice that maybe is special to you, or maybe something that tends to work well for some of your clients?
Yeah, I think often we begin, and I always talk about like, well, let we just sit down and where we're seated, and so invite folks to close their eyes and just notice sensations around sitting. Some curiosity, around how do you know you're sitting? Maybe sensations around the back of the legs or lower back. Maybe a sense of less weight on the feet. Maybe noticing some support around the arms. So we're noticing body sensations as we're sitting. Might be supportive to just noticing those areas where you hold stress and activation in your body. Might be muscles of the face or abdominal area. So bring some attention, just kind of notice the face. Sometimes we can't change or alter things that we're not aware of, so we're practicing awareness of the face or the shoulders. The belly. And maybe there can be a softening. And now perhaps just some awareness of our breath. How do we know we're breathing? Where do we sense the in-breath? And the out-breath. Maybe for the next exhale or two, just more fully exhaling, just letting the lungs empty. Kind of triggering the parasympathetic or nervous system. Yeah, you're safe, you're secure. And sometimes putting some words or intentions as we begin the next moment on whatever we're doing may be helpful. May I be safe and secure. May my mind and body be at peace and ease as I experience life's joys and sorrows. May my spirit be filled with loving kindness. And may I know all things are just as they are. So.
I feel like we need your little dong bell.
Yeah.
We need that in here. We should bring that along. Thank you.
Little bell, little vibration.
It's lovely. I like that. I like that very much. I've not done that particular one before, so thank you for doing that for us. I would like to lead us in one. The Glowy meditation practice. It's a daily reflection practice that I developed and placed in my book, The Chaos Antidote, A Fable About Mindfulness, and the accompanying workbook. And I try to practice it every single day. Sometimes it's written. Sometimes it comes after a float, and one of the sensory deprivation floats. Sometimes it just happens when I realize I've gone through the day and I haven't really touched base with myself very well. So it just kind of centers me. So I'll lead you through it.
Super.
The first, it's an acronym, GLOWY, and the first letter stands for grateful. And so what's something or a few things that you're grateful for?
What's greeted me this morning is some gratefulness to have some really close friends.
It's a treasure. Yes. The second letter is L for lift up. And those can be things that you might need help, you might need resources. Is there something like that?
I'm grateful for the close friends, and with that closeness comes some sorrow. And so this one is experiencing some sorrow. So I lift up thoughts and prayers and his knowing that he's, not alone, or people are thinking about him during this trying time. Yeah.
The O stands for observe, and this can be a body sensation or one of the other senses, maybe something you see or hear.
Yeah. Now observing just some my back. There's a certain area that holds some stress and activation in my upper back. I can feel that. I'm just noticing some softening. Just kind of, thinking of my good friend, feeling sad. The heart breaks a bit around that. Feeling anxious to a degree about what comes up next for that person. So that's kind of, and just hopeful that that there's this knowing that we're not sure how or why all this is happening, but just that there, it kind of is as it is, and there will be lessons in all of it. And I got a text this morning from him, and so it's still with my body and my heart. And first thing I noticed was, God, I want to fix, manage, or control this for him. Observing that.
So what is your wholesome intention? And we talk a lot about intention in mindfulness. Maybe how you want to be or show up, or something that you intend to do today.
Yeah, I tend to be present and supportive. And I threw one idea out to this friend today, and I don't know if that was wise. It's tough, hard to evaluate that now, but that's a little bit of a fear I have. So just to be, just exactly what we're talking, just be present and be with him, and be, know that, hopefully that he feels support in whatever way he does.
Yep. The last one is my favorite. It's the why.
Yeah.
It stands for you are.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I need a little extra love or just feel like it, I'll even give myself a little hug.
Yeah.
They say it. So it's a you are statement. So Scott, you are what? What's a great affirmation to send yourself out. Give yourself a little love.
Yeah. Amazing and incredible. And the thought is just like, just human, just all parts, lots of different parts. My favorite word is and. So I am amazing. I am incredible. And I'm a lot of things all over the spectrum, and to be okay with that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that with me.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to plug what you have going on in your world. Are there ways that folks can learn more about you and the offerings that you have?
Insight mindfulness-counseling-center.com is the website. So that's probably the main doorway to walk through, and I don't maintain it very well.
You observe that you do not.
And so it'll be dated and all that stuff. There will be one thing that might be invitational, folks. On Mondays and Thursdays from 12:15 to 12:45, I've been doing this 14 or 15 years. Just people gather virtually for now, just to practice sitting. And so I find that useful for myself. There's no fee, there's no cost, no reservations. So there'll be a link on the website so people can kind of hit that. And yeah, if they want to practice, just being, that's one home. And what's great is there's a lot of options now. There's a lot of places to partner.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful call. Beautiful hearts are on that call. Yeah. So thank you for doing that for all these years, and thank you for the work that you do in mindfulness in general, and for coming on today, Scott. It's been a lovely conversation.
Yeah. Oh,
thanks
you. For the thanks and spreading the good news. Thanks, Aimee.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Mindfulness Academy Podcast. From my heart to yours, may you live with ease. This is your host, Aimee Morgan, signing off.